I actually think that part of the reason that Peter Jackson's original 3 Lord of the Rings trilogy turned out so well was because he made it in New Zealand, far away from the distractions of...
Why do popular franchises fail?
I feel that popular franchises tend to fail because corporations are incapable of making them under the current factory filmmaking conditions. One, popular franchises are created generally by a singular person who was not paid by a company to think it up, that it was an idea that came not necessarily fully formed, but percolated for years from that person's experiences, whether it's a Gene Roddenberry with Star Trek, whether it's a George Lucas with Star Wars, whether it's a J.R.R. Tolkien with the Lord of the Rings series. A franchise comes birthed from a person, not because a company hired them to think up a new franchise. It came out of someone because it was a creative thing that they needed to express. And big companies, which are required to fully fund a huge property or franchise, the conditions under which content is made at those corporations is not conducive to a singular creative voice. It's art by committee. There are other concerns. Budget is a concern. Is it going to have a happy meal? I mean, Tim Burton famously got in trouble after the sequel to his 1989 Batman film starring Michael Keaton. The second movie, Batman Returns, was much darker in tone and more to Tim Burton's creative liking. And it infuriated McDonald's because here was a movie that was kind of frightening to young children. McDonald's even issued an apology. There are videos on YouTube you can look up about this. McDonald's actually issued an apology when they released a series of Penguin, Catwoman, and Batman toys because the movie didn't really fit the young demographic that would have bought, say, a Happy Meal. So you've got your budget concerns. Are we going to be able to make toys? Are we going to be able to, put the cast in that we want? Like, in addition to concerns about, this movie costs a lot. Is it going to play in other countries? Is it going to play to a worldwide audience? Because we're spending $400 million on this thing. Once you have all of these concerns on the shoulders of a creator, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to come out the other end with something that still has that vibrancy of a single creative vision. Now, some filmmakers have learned to work within that system very well. I would say that Christopher Nolan is one of the filmmakers that has had more success than failure in that working within that system. Although there've been, I don't know if there was a happy meal necessarily for the Dark Knight Batman movie. I don't remember, actually. I should know that. But his other films as well. And in addition, someone like Denis Villeneuve with Dune, he was able to balance the studio concerns and have a vision that was his vision of the novel, Frank Herbert's original novel for Dune. So it can be done, but I do think that it requires a singular creative visionary that has the full support of the studio. And when they say, look, when Chris Nolan says we're not going to do Inception toys, maybe listen to Chris Nolan that like, hey, this movie, I don't think the toys are necessarily going to work with this, right? So, but when I think once you have, signed over the rights to whatever it is, Star Trek, a Star Wars, a Lord of the Rings, and handed it over to a group of people who never created it to begin with, then what you've got is you've got that new creative team now saying, I'm going to do my version of this, when it's something that maybe George Lucas would never have allowed to have happened, Or a Gene Roddenberry would have said that doesn't fit the universe. Or Tolkien would have said, no, this is not what would have happened in this universe. They're not there to be the checks and balances. So when you've lost that primary creative voice and it just becomes a piece of IP, you know, when it's looked on as intellectual property, and then you've even got in that mix the concerns of stockholders now for the company, like, well, you know, we're just going to do this because it will appease the stockholders. You have so many concerns. It's a miracle that almost anything worth watching comes out of a studio these days. So I think that's where they go wrong, is you've lost the original person who is the shepherd for the franchise, whether they're actually directly doing the writing or not, right? So when you've lost that shepherd and it goes to a corporation, I don't think a corporation is the best fit for the most positive result. It can happen, and it does happen. There are glimpses. But for the most part, I think that era is gone. I don't think we'll ever see like a George Lucas or a Gene Roddenberry or someone like that ever again. The hoops that you have to jump through, the concerns that you have to balance, stockholders, toys, budget, this, you know, it's amazing. I think that's a skill unto itself. Now, I would love to hear, and I've had very frank and honest discussions with friends of mine in the indie film world who all say, you know, it's almost like a lot of these movies, the story behind the scenes of making the movie turns out better. That's a more interesting story than the movie, because the fact that, okay, we got the financing, but the girlfriend of the main investor who's putting in $10 million, she needs to be the lead and she's not that great. And so you're juggling. I can almost tell when I see a small indie movie, I'm like, oh, these are the compromises that person had to make because these are the weakest parts of the movie. And the filmmaker's just fingers crossed, hoping you don't notice. So it's almost as if I think a lot of filmmakers would benefit from, you know, taking some courses in therapy, in diplomacy, and in finance, in addition to being decent at making films, in order to be able to set those concerns aside and make something creatively fulfilling and worthwhile with that singular vision. But I see franchises, you know, going off the rails, and I'm like, it's just too many cooks. It's corporate content, too many cooks, made by, you know, committee, and you can just see it. You know, this recent teaser for the Lord of the Rings of Power just came out, and there's a 56-second trailer for it. And I'm looking at it, and to me, it looks like a PowerPoint presentation that was shown to Amazon to sell the series. I don't know what connection it has to Lord of the Rings. To me, it looks like dollar store Game of Thrones. It doesn't have the feeling of the Lord of the Rings. It's a miracle that Peter Jackson was able to make Lord of the Rings with his own creative vision, but being incredibly respectful of the source material. And that's a thing that I think is not spoken about enough, the respect for the source material. And I know that Peter Jackson, he's even spoken about this. You can look up interviews with Peter Jackson. He said, you know, I have my own personal ideas, but these aren't my ideas. This is Tolkien's story. I'm going to tell his story. And this will be, you know, his own vision of that. And I think that, I actually think that part of the reason that Peter Jackson's original 3 Lord of the Rings trilogy turned out so well was because he made it in New Zealand, far away from the distractions of that could have consumed him from, you know, the corporate overlords in Hollywood. So being off making those movies away from that distraction in New Zealand, I think actually helped quite a bit.